Hey guys, welcome back to another Q&A video. It is October 26th, 2018. Q&A was open this week, so got a variety of questions and I will get right into them. So first one, with clients having ED issues, so erectile dysfunction issues, what type of blood work should they get? Okay, so for blood work, the obvious ones are going to be testosterone levels, estrogen levels. They're probably going to want to have free test levels done, possibly SHBG done, and then you can look into, you want to look into the androgen to estrogen ratios, the AD ratios. If they're using anabolics, perhaps they're probably going to be more prone to some kind of imbalance there. Although non-enhanced individuals can certainly have issues as well. Obviously, if testosterone is chronically low or estrogen is chronically high, and when I say chronically high, it's very, very high. A lot of people still will have, I'm not going to say a lot, but a good amount of people really have a lot of ED issues with higher estrogens, more so with lower estrogen. But again, there's a ratio that comes into play there. And you're also, you can also check progesterone and prolactin, though we're in a controlled estrogen environment, those really aren't a concern. Now, again, without knowing if they're using hormones and what their hormonal status is there in terms of PEDs, then it's a little hard to say what all they're going to need to do. There's probably going to be some kind of adjustment supplementation wise there, and even then, there's also a psychological component to this. So, psychological ED is a real thing. If you have it's not always right off the bat, but if you do have some kind of ED issue and it's reoccurring, and then you go into a situation and you can't perform because you are thinking that, oh my gosh, I don't know, am I going to have an issue or am I not going to have an issue? Then you run into the psychological ED, and that happens to all kinds of people. That's pretty common. Even when the hormonal issue is resolved, they may have some kind of psychological issue. And there's also some other things that can go into it, like circulatory issues. Some people that have poor cardiovascular health and poor circulation can have some ED issues as well. So, that is something to consider, also. Now, let's see, next one. How would you identify signals of declining insulin sensitivity for a natural athlete deep in their off season? And what are some methods you might utilize to restore it? Okay, so declining insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance is going to be the same, really. It's going to be similar signs between natural and enhanced. It's not really going to be a whole lot different. You can still use some of the big signs and symptoms are going to be pretty similar. Looking at blood glucose, that's a great way to start. Watch as it slowly creeps up, then you might be treading into that insulin resistance territory. Looking at, great ones just visually looking at fat to muscle gain ratio. If you're gaining weight, what's the quality? Is the ratio favorable? Are you gaining more of what looks like lean tissue than fat tissue, or are you gaining more fat than muscle? So, if you're gaining more fat than muscle, then you're not partitioning well, chances are. So that's another thing to think about. There's some subtle things like pumps in the gym. That's one that you can look at. There's some other, there's definitely other factors that go into whether or not you're getting a pump in the gym. What is your training like? Stress. Just circulation. There's a lot of things that go into that, but this could be one, that could be one thing to pay attention to. In restoring it, it's going to be similar. I would probably look at what are the variables that are causing the insulin resistance in the first place. Is it related to just being in too large of a surplus, or a surplus for a long time? You might just need to come out of a surplus. You might need to do a mini cut, or just go down a deficit for a certain period of time. Losing body fat also helps. If you do have a lot of body fat or are accumulating body fat, then losing that during that mini cut process can also help. Though, I mean, people can have some insulin resistance with relatively lower body fat, but it's not as common. You know, it's not as common, and there are other factors that can cause some higher blood glucose levels too that aren't necessarily like traditional insulin resistance as we're speaking here, things like digestion. But yeah, I mean, one thing people forget too is they look at carbohydrates, and that's going to be a big one. Obviously, it's going to cause insulin release, and doing it repetitively, there's going to be, you know, your pancreas is eventually going to have too large of a burden on it, and your cells are, you know, only going to uptake so much glucose, and you're only going to perform the process so efficiently for so long if you're just, you know, if you're beating it down with lots of carbs. So that's obviously important. But I mean, there are other well, I mean, all macros can really cause some type of insulin resistance. I mean, you can have, it's just being in a surplus for an extended period of time, you're going to have insulin resistance at some point. It's going to happen. If you never come out of a surplus, you're going to most likely develop some kind of resistance, at least, and it could be extremely slowly, but you know, it's pretty likely to happen. So if you drop carbs but you don't actually go into a deficit, then you might correct it, but you might not. You might need to drop, you know, you might need to drop them more or drop fats out too. Fats can also indirectly cause high blood glucose. So I mean, they're not obviously consuming a fat, your blood glucose level isn't going to go up. That's not how they work. But you can, you know, you can cause some like delay in gastric emptying and things of that nature just with the consuming the fats. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can become insulin resistant. So go back, figure out what's probably causing it. Do I need to fix my digestion? Do I need to rework my macros, or do I need to just go into a deficit for a little bit and resensitize and maybe lose some body fat? So, and yeah, and I didn't mention anything supplemental. Yeah, glucose disposal agents, things like that are going to help resensitize. Yeah, they're definitely going to be useful for enhanced people using something like a basal insulin or a combination of basal insulin and fast-acting insulins during stressful periods, and to take the stress off the beta cells in your pancreas. Yeah, that's helpful too, and really talk about that stuff. But yeah, I mean, all those things are going to help for sure. Okay. Well, what to do if you wake up and multiple times each night, 6 to 7 times? Well, yeah, that's not good. I'm assuming, well, first off, try to figure out why you're waking up. Obviously, duh. That's going to be the goal. But is it like, are you waking up to go to the bathroom 6 to 7 times a night? Maybe you need to reduce your water intake at night or cut it off. I mean, especially if you're lean, and depending on what if there's not a lot of carbohydrates or anything in your body to really hold on to fluids, you're just gonna, you're gonna go to the bathroom. Anyone that's been lean or really low calories and lean, they know they just piss all the time. So you're probably not gonna want to pound water all the way up till you go to sleep. Probably gonna keep you up all night. So, that's something to consider. Now, if you're waking up, I mean, there's just a plethora of things that could make you wake up. I mean, you'd really have to look at, to answer this question, I'd really have to be able to see what your lifestyle is like. Are you stressed? What is your sleep environment like? Is there something that's waking up? Is there noise? I mean, is there too much light? Do you have sleep apnea? Do you have sleep apnea that's causing you to, maybe you're snoring and you lose your breath, and then that wakes you up? I mean, that happens to people with sleep apnea all the time. There could be just multiple things going into waking up, repetitively. You have a poor sleep-wake cycle. You go to bed at different times every night and wake up at different times a lot, and that, that does cause your circadian clock to be thrown off, and your hormones aren't going to be correct, and you're not going to feel tired at the right times, and you're not going to feel awake at the right times, and you're going to maybe wake up randomly in the middle of the night with things like an adrenal dump of hormones. There's a lot of things that really go into that. So that's a hard question to answer. But if After you watch this, if you have more questions, you can let me know, and I might be able to dive into it a little bit more, because there's got to be more context to it, you know. So, all right. Oh man, I missed 2 of them. Oops. Okay. All right. So, how to deal with patella tendonitis in the left knee. Outside of left knee is tight and gets to the point where I have difficult time squatting or using leg press after warming up. No problem with leg extensions, and I just started to foam roll. Okay. All right, outside of left knee. Yeah, so, well, I would probably, for one, look at your leg extensions, look at the toe position in there, and see if that lends itself to like what range of motion is hurting you, what you might be able to translate that over into your leg press and into your squats. Maybe, I'm not saying that's necessarily going to fix the issue, but it could be, you know, it could at least temporarily relieve the pain. And a lot of times, like, some of the tendonitis issues are just inflammatory, and they're just repetitive beating on the joint in a range of motion that it doesn't like, I guess, that it's just not comfortable in, that it's impinging the joint in some way in that range of motion. You're doing it repetitively, just like, you know, elbow tendonitis from bench pressing. Well, the bar path, it just doesn't feel good, and you do it repetitively, and your elbow starts hurting. I talked about this too in the injury video I did recently, so you might want to check that out. I talked about it a little more depth, but you know, I would maybe find a range of motion, or find a bar path in your squats or in your leg presses that feels good. And I would maybe even take a video of it and see, you know, what feels good. Look at the knee position, you know, knee alignment with your hips, and you might be able to figure out, you know, what's impinging your joint, and have somebody work on it. You know, it's hard for me to sit here and say, yeah, I'm giving you things that can kind of work around it, but it's hard for me to say this is what to do until you have somebody actually look at it and work on it. They can probably, if they're good and they know what they're looking for, they're going to be able to go through, look at a movement and tell you, hey, this is probably why you're having this pain. You need to correct this. You have this tightness. I mean, because sometimes the origin, a lot of these tightnesses aren't even necessarily in the location. So you have knee pain. That doesn't mean that you have anything wrong with your knee. It could be your hamstring. It could be your glute. It could be something in your hip, your ankle. Your ankle mobility might suck. I mean, there's just so many little things that could go into it. So I would probably have somebody look at it. And if you need a recommendation, like, there's a couple people that I like that can look at movement patterns and help you diagnose those things. So you can let me know. All right, we had to readjust a couple things, so this is part 2, but we'll get right back to the questions. A couple more here on Instagram. Next one was, do you personally like to have whole food meals post-training? And if so, how much fat and fiber do you allow? And then after that, do you have another protein carb, or like to go mixed or PF meal, so protein fat? All right, so I do have whole food meals after training, typically. That's just a personal preference. You can certainly have a shake and powdered carbs or you know, whatever. It doesn't really make much difference at the end of the day. I just prefer to have the whole food. That's just what I like, so that's what I do. It doesn't really make much difference. Beyond that, it's just going to depend on the person's the timing, the timing of their macros throughout the day, when they're eating, in accordance to when they're training. Are they training at night? Are they training close to bed? How many more meals do they have left after that? A lot of those things are going to come into play when I'm deciding, what's going to be after that post-workout meal. Now, if someone trains in the afternoon or evening, they might have the post-workout meal with protein and carbs. They might have another meal after that with protein and carbs and go to bed. That could be, perhaps that could be it. But in general, we're timing carbohydrates around times that are going to be more insulin sensitive and more apt to partition nutrients better. So around training typically. But it's not going to be across the board with every person. Some people I have do pre-workout carbs. Some people I don't. Some people I have do more meals a day with carbs than others. And some people eat protein fat meals all day except for one meal. I mean, it just really depends on the person. Me personally, I have the post-workout protein carb, and then I have a protein fat meal after that, and I have a protein carb meal before bed. So that's what I do. Fiber and fat, I don't have a set number, though, I'm intentionally picking, usually separating them. And most people, I do have some people that will do mixed meals with just because they just feel better, they prefer it, or it just depends on what their goals are really. But I'm separating them, protein, carb, protein, fat. So primarily, I don't have a set number, but like I said, I'm intentionally picking foods that are lower fat. So most of the meals for myself and most people are probably going to fall 10 grams of fat or less. I mean, most people are probably going to be less, depending on like what your meat source is and what your carb source is. A lot of the carb sources are pretty low fat anyhow, and as long as you're not picking like you're going to pick a leaner meat source or a leaner protein source over something like ribeye steaks, probably might not be your post-workout if you're limiting fat at that point. So just depends. I'm not, like I said, I'm not setting a number, but I'm also not intentionally picking higher fat sources. I'm intentionally picking lower fat sources. So that's typically right around that number. It's about the same for fiber. Fiber could vary a lot. I mean, if you're going to use something like cereal or rice cakes or even white rice, cream of rice, I mean, all those things are going to be pretty low fat, or if you're adding some fruit in there or whatever. I mean, all that stuff's going to be like really low fat. Or I'm sorry, low, yeah, it will be low fat, low fiber. But you could have some sources in there have a little more fiber. If someone's going to use like oats, or someone's going to use like potatoes with skins on them. Some people, I mentioned fruit. Fruit would actually probably have, be a little more fiber. But yeah, but again, probably going to fall in that 10 grams or less. I'm not going to try to overload much more than that, simply because, I don't want to slow down digestion too much. I just don't want to interrupt the person's GI tract, because a lot of time that might be a heavier caloric meal than some of the other meals post-workout. So I don't necessarily want to take super long to digest and overlap a ton into the next meal. So next one. Okay. I think this is the last one on here. Unless I got mixed up on the 2-part video, but hopefully not. Okay, so next one, with the current industry debate over volume versus tension as the primary driver of hypertrophy, where do you stand? Well, I stand, as like anything else, I stand in the side of logic and what works for the person. What is practical and applicable. So I have seen both sides. I think there's good arguments on both sides. I've actually got to see certain people speak in person that have research in this, in volume versus load or tension when it comes to hypertrophy. And we do know now that volume is a pretty big driver of hypertrophy, and tension is a driver as well. This volume in the sense that it's volume performed with at least sufficient intensity, so enough to elicit the response. Not volume like curling like 2-pound dumbbells. So, but again, man, it just really comes down to what the, what's practical for the person. And sometimes it's what's practical from multiple standpoints. It could be what's practical from a time standpoint. What do they have time? Do they have time to spend 3 hours in the gym because they're a super advanced lifter and they've been training for 20 years and they need some ridiculously large amount of working volume to have the response? Is that really even practical for them? Or do they need to lean more towards the side of tension and creating tension somehow, or more tension and increasing tension somewhere somehow, because they just don't have time? I mean, so there's just a lot of things to consider. And then obviously nervous system is the biggest thing. My one issue, not my one of my issues with a lot of these arguments are, you have the researchers, yes, and I'm not saying the researchers are biased, because they have, they have parameters within their research that they're going to use, but a lot of the people that are picking sides and choosing their arguments and arguing these things, they have this preconceived bias that this is what they do with themselves, or this is what they do with a lot of their other clients, and that's probably what side they're going to lean on, whether that's the best side or not. Probably not a best side, but you know what I mean. You're going to tend to lean towards what you use and what works for you on, in the argument. So no, I just think to do that is kind of silly and limiting. So ideally we do both. Ideally we try to slowly increase volume at certain points and try to increase tension and load when we can. I mean, obviously there's probably a ceiling on load eventually. I mean, you're gonna stop. Sometimes you're gonna get injured, or you're gonna get too old, or whatever. I mean, eventually it's gonna slow down. And same with volume. I mean, you're not gonna have. Is it practical to just keep increasing volume indefinitely? Probably not. So again, I don't have a side. That's just kind of where I stand. I know I think that these things they have a good, it's a good rule of thumb to start with if someone has no prior feedback and has not tried anything before and they don't know what works for them. So we have at least we can probably figure out, what is the minimum effective volume and kind of build from there. We can start with minimum effective and kind of see like, okay, this is how we progress. Can we build on that? So that's kind of where I stand. I tend to not take sides because I have people's training that are all over the board and that progress. So, yep. All right. So, okay. A few here on Facebook. What's so stimulating about stimulants then? Do they act upon adrenals to cause stimulation, or any of the compounds used stimulating in and of themselves? Do any not place load on adrenals? What's a person's next move when they do nothing, i.e. I fall asleep straight away after caffeine? Just a room 101 of all the effects and considerations of using stims, please. This is probably why I should screen the questions before I start. This is a good question, but that's a really big question. I might have to, I'll touch on this some, and then if it's not a thorough enough answer, because I'm already getting into, further into the video. If it's not a good enough answer, maybe I can do a separate video on it, because this is, it's a good topic. It's just, that's, a lot of questions within one. So, so let's focus on a primary one. So something like caffeine. I mean, you're looking at, so several things are really happening when you ingest it. I mean, there is going to be some impact in your adrenals, but it's going to be a central nervous system stimulant. So you're going to have stimulation, neuron firing in the brain. You're going to have effects. You're going to have dopamine release. So it's going to make you feel good. It can interfere with adenosine activity. And that is one of the reasons that it keeps you awake. It's also going to, that stimulation is going to tell the pituitary to signal the adrenals and release adrenaline or epinephrine. So yeah, I mean, it's acting on and probably cortisol, so, cortisol as well. So yeah, it's acting on your adrenals. But the adrenals, because you asked about adrenals several times. So adrenals is more of, they're going to respond to stress. They're going to respond to central nervous system stimulants. They're going to respond to doing sets of squats. They're going to respond to getting chased by a leopard through the jungle, all that stuff, fight or flight. Pretty much any time that you're activating, like that you're sympathetically driven, like sympathetic nervous system is being activated and you're stimulated, probably going to have some adrenal activity just as a stress response. So yeah, that's something to consider. And that's where the adrenals get we come up with the term like adrenal fatigue, or adrenals will keep up to a certain point. I like to kind of use the example of, look at insulin resistance, for example. You keep pounding glucose in, eventually, the pancreas, the beta cells get worn out, the pancreas can't keep up with the demand, and poof, you are insulin resistant, more or less. Now, same, kind of similar, adrenals can only keep up with the demand of the stimulation so much, and eventually you're going to go from hyper adrenal function to hypo adrenal function, or adrenal insufficiency, as I'll call it, even though it's not medically recognized. Whatever, it's not, and that's essentially what's going on. They just can't keep up, they get worn out. So do any of them not place load on the adrenals? To my knowledge, anything that's probably going to be a central nervous system stimulant is probably going to place load on the adrenals. I can't think of anything that wouldn't, because you're getting that stimulation. The adrenals aren't the primary thing being acted on. It's just that they're that secondary response is coming from the adrenals because of the stressor, as I said. So probably not that I'm aware of. Now, what happens when they do nothing? Well, a couple things. In this case, you've most likely just build up a tolerance. Like I said, like from what it sounds like, you've used them repetitively, and you need more to elicit the response, and you might not even get the response. You may have pounded their neurotransmitters, dopamine so much. You may have, the adrenals might be so beat up. Your nervous system may be so fried. You're not going to get a response. Now, there's people that are just legitimately metabolize it different than others. There's Dr. Scott Stevenson, for example, did a good video on this. He was talking about yohimbine, but he talks about some other drugs and stuff too. There's certain enzymes that metabolize these things, and some people just don't metabolize things like others. They need more, need less, or they don't feel good with it, or they feel better with it, or whatever. So you have those people, but in this case, I'm assuming that's probably not the case. I'm assuming it's just an overuse thing. So in which case, stop. It's such a hard thing to do, though, is the adrenals get damaged to a point, and you'll probably, you probably have to do things like actually try to restore adrenal function through supplementation, adaptogenic herbs, and even like adrenal extracts, even though that's kind of a slippery slope. That's a different subject. I may have even talked about that in my adrenal videos, but yeah, man, you gotta stop. But for a lot of people too, I find that cold turkey is just the best. Just stop and try to restore it as quickly as possible, and it's gonna really suck, but that's just kind of how it goes. There are some other little tricks and strategies in there. If you're interested in doing something like that, I would go back and look at my videos on my YouTube about adrenal insufficiency. Even though that wasn't why I had adrenal insufficiency, there's still a lot of things that are going to apply directly to this situation that would be pretty helpful. So next one, a few more here. So what do you feel is a good aggressive number for gaining phases while being able to keep health in check? For more context, maybe, damn, people messaging me. Get out of here. For more context, maybe weight gain per month and or calories consumed in a day. Well, calories per day, I can't answer that. No one's going to be able to answer that. That's obviously way too contextual. It depends on the person. And as far as like how much you could gain in a month, there are several variables to consider, but there's some things to keep in mind. Main things would be, in a stable hormone environment, you're not going to gain weight that quickly. So a lot of people, if they're super compensating glycogen, like they're coming right out of a cutting phase, and they're lean and they're insulin sensitive and they're depleted, and they're going from a lower hormone environment to a higher hormone environment, if someone's enhanced, all of these things are going to cause fluid, glycogen, nitrogen retention, all these things really quickly, and you're going to blow up, and you're not going to look like you gain much fat. You might even look tighter in certain ways. So yeah, I mean, but that's not necessarily lean, dry tissue. So once those things are out of the way, and even if you're an enhanced person, but you've reached the peak of the hormones and they're stable in hormone homeostasis, that stable point, the actual weight gain is going to be very slow. Glycogen's full, intramuscular triglycerides are full, hormones are stable. You're in an environment now where you're just going to slowly gain. And some people are going to be faster than others, and those higher hormones are going to affect that, obviously, but it's not going to be fast. I mean, you're not going to gain 10 pounds a month of just pure lean tissue. It's not going to, that would be insane. But, I mean, you're going to gain, I don't know, a few pounds maybe at most. It's hard to say. Again, it's hard to say, and it depends on the person. I mean, there are people that are going to defy that big time. They're going to be way more or way less. So as much as you can get within the context of your genetics and of just having a favorable ratio of fat or muscle to fat gain. But it's probably not going to be more than, a few pounds maybe. Okay, so next one, myostatin versus receptor saturation. So I asked on this, I did see this one, so I asked a couple questions to make sure I understood. I still don't think I fully got the question, but they said, I feel people confuse myostatin for saturated receptors or the myth of saturation. So I'm guessing that by saturation that they mean, they're saying the receptor can't, I'm not sure if they're saying the receptor can't take on any more androgens or the receptor is desensitized. I'm not sure which they mean. But we'll just, okay, so in myostatin first. So myostatin, if we're talking about these two things in a higher hormone environment, what's gonna be the limiting factor for growth? Yeah, myostatin could be an issue. For my research and what I understand, and it seems like around maybe the 7, 8 to 10, maybe 12-ish week, depending on the person, like getting in that range there of higher hormone environment, like a blast or a cycle or whatever, you're going to have a higher myostatin level. It's going to limit, it's going to help, it's going to slow things down. So yeah, that could be a factor. Now, how are we going to tell the difference between that and if receptor saturation is slowing down? I mean, they're not going to be able to tell. Now, if you're talking about receptor desensitization, that is a really hard word to say, especially when you've been staring at the computer all day. But yeah, truthfully, I'm not super convinced that we actually have we lose sensitivity. At one point, I thought I was under the impression that we did, and through observational evidence, we definitely see that people that would stay on forever, unless they just kept pushing their dose up, which really isn't realistic from just keeping you alive. Like you're eventually your health's gonna suck. But we noticed that they either stop progressing, or they come off, or they go back down to a cruise. And the people that blast and cruise tend to get better results over the long run. Now, that would kind of seem like you desensitize and then you resensitize and then you go again, right? You would think. Some of the research I've seen and some of the people that I follow that do a lot of research specifically in that field of androgen receptors, they kind of are saying otherwise, and that would lead us to believe that you would just stay in a super physiological level of hormones forever. This is assuming that your health didn't, decline. But again, what we see is that just doesn't pan out. We see that progress stops eventually. So what's limiting us? Like, is Is it desensitizing receptors? Is it myostatin? Could be. I think that's probably a contributing factor. Is it people just are getting fat and insulin resistant, so they aren't gaining muscle anymore? Is that it? Within the cycle, you know? Or, I mean, because we do know too that we know that you could potentially have more androgen receptor sites, but that doesn't mean that you're going to actually have more androgen receptor, have more activity at all of those sites. So again, I'm hoping that there's more research on this. I don't think that we fully know if the whole desensitizing thing is completely foolproof. Like, I don't think we have a full understanding of it yet. So hopefully there's some more research that comes out on that subject. But again, from observational evidence, we tend to see that whether you want to call it resensitizing or not, it tends to, we tend to see that people that blast and cruise ultimately have, people that take at least some kind of break in there ultimately have better progress in the long run usually. So take that for what it's worth. Okay. Now, last one, older bikini clients, older bikini competitors who are lean but are, for lack of better words, saggy and loose, especially in the glutes. Could you load them into a show enough to tighten up that soft jiggle? Yeah, I mean, you could definitely, if they're flat, I mean, yeah, you could definitely load carbs, fats, combination of both, whatever you need to do, and it's going to tighten up some. If the muscle belly's big enough to expand that much to push this, tighten the skin out, that'll work. It's probably going to, regardless, probably going to work somewhat. But honestly, man, like at a point, it's not going to fully work. Some people, they lose the fat. They just don't have skin elasticity, especially when they're older. Just bikini bite that shit inside their, inside their suit. I had a client that had like loose skin on the lower stomach. When this physique competitor, she was very lean, but didn't, you could still see it. So what do you do? Just push it down in the, in the waistline of the suit and tape that shit down, or bikini bite it down. So yeah, you can do that, or they can do it. You don't have to do it. You don't have to mess with their skin, but they could literally just on the V of their suit, just push the damn skin in and tape it inside. Tape it inside of the glutes, or bikini bite, or glue it down, or whatever the hell you got to do. So I feel like you could probably stretch it and make the appearance of tighter skin that way, on top of obviously loading it. So yeah. All right, guys, that is it. This video is entirely too long. I can barely read the screen now, so I need a break. So I will talk to you guys next time.